The silver is mine, and the gold is mine. This is God's quote from the Bible, and this is a pattern. Every major civilization in human history placed gold at the center of their religion. I spent a long time thinking that was just symbolic language. Egypt called it the flesh of the gods. Sumer built divine thrones from it. Then, I started looking at what modern science is discovering about gold. Today, researchers are studying whether gold nanoparticles interact with the mechanisms of cellular aging. And today, we build the instruments that look at the edge of the universe from it. Something connects these things. We don't know what. This video follows that thread, and I want to tell you what I found. Gold doesn't burn, doesn't rust, and doesn't deteriorate with acid. Leave it in the ground for 3,000 years, and when it's recovered, it will be exactly as it was on the day it was buried. There is no other metal that behaves this way. None. Chemists call it noble, a term that means it refuses to participate in the conversations that consume everything else. In its grand form, on the scale visible to the human eye, gold is almost completely passive. It doesn't react, it endures. Gold objects have been recovered from all the great civilizations that ever existed. From the never-before-seen tombs of Ur, 4,000 years before Christ, from the tombs of the Egyptian pharaohs, from the temples of Mesopotamia, from the biblical accounts of Solomon's building projects, and from cultures on opposite sides of the world that never came into contact. And in every case, without exception, gold was used by the gods. This raises a question that seems simple until examined closely. These were not naive civilizations. Egypt, Sumeria, and the cultures that produced the biblical texts were sophisticated enough to build monuments that have resisted complete explanation, to develop precise astronomical systems, and to manage economies, armies, and agricultural networks across vast territories. They understood materials. They worked bronze, copper, and iron. They knew exactly which metals served practical purposes and which did not. And yet, the only metal that does not age, that does not deteriorate, that resists everything, was set aside, reserved, and destined for something invisible. Something that was above them. The same metal that the ancient world reserved exclusively for the gods is now being tested and used on a scale that these civilizations could never have imagined. At dimensions smaller than 5 nanometers, a scale that none of us can even imagine. Gold ceases to behave as it does in its immense form. At this scale, something different happens, and gold becomes reactive. It gains the ability to perform processes that larger quantities of gold cannot. The metal that, on a larger scale, is defined by its incorruptibility, reveals, on a scale invisible to our eyes, a completely different nature. The silver is mine, and the gold is mine. 6 words in the original Bible, and the one who utters them, according to the text, is the God who created everything that exists. Belonging to a being who built the universe from nothing and demands nothing from it. A being who shakes the heavens and the earth, commands armies of angels, and holds the destiny of civilizations in what the text describes as his hand. And yet, at this moment, in the 6th century BC, a claim is made, not about creation as a whole, but about a specific material: gold. The standard theological interpretation reads this as a guarantee. A disheartened people are being informed that the resources needed to rebuild the temple already belong to the one who commands them. The interpretation is coherent. It fits the historical context. But it leaves a question unanswered. Among so many materials and metals, why gold specifically? Why not say, the mountains are mine, the rivers are mine, the harvests are mine? Why, in a moment of divine discourse directly linked to the construction of a sacred space, are silver and gold mentioned individually? The text recognizes a difference between them and preserves it precisely. This is not the first time that gold appears with this level of specificity. In 1 Kings 6, the construction of Solomon's temple is described in detail. The inner sanctuary, the Holy of Holies, was a perfect cube, 20 cubits long, 20 cubits wide, 20 cubits high. All surfaces covered in pure gold. The cedar altar overlaid with gold. The walls, the ceiling, the floor, gold. The cherubim, imposing figures with vast wingspans, gold. The olive wood doors, carved and overlaid, gold. The threshold, the furniture, the interior space itself, gold. The material condition of the space is precisely defined, as if it were not merely aesthetic, but functional. The presence that is to inhabit this space is not being invited into a beautiful room. It is being placed in an environment constructed from a specific substance. Now, we travel to another historical moment and find a modern construction capable of observing the cosmos and the universe. The James Webb Space Telescope, the most precise astronomical instrument ever built, has each of its mirror segments coated with a thin layer of gold, approximately 100 nanometers thick. A film so thin that it is measured in atoms. Gold reflects 99% of infrared light. Aluminum and silver reflect significantly less. At the wavelengths that matter, the wavelengths that carry the oldest light in the universe, no other material performs so effectively. Engineers tested alternatives. They evaluated various coatings, and they returned to the same material: gold. The instrument designed to observe the origin of galaxies is coated with the same metal that ancient texts associate with the presence of the divine. 3,000 years apart, 2 completely distinct problems and the same solution. Inside the temple, there is another detail. Gold chains extended across the entrance to the inner sanctuary, marking the boundary between the outer chamber and the Holy of Holies. Beyond this threshold stood the Ark of the Covenant, coated in gold, inside and out. The mercy seat, also of gold. All surfaces of the object associated with direct contact between the human and the divine were made of the same material. The Ark was not static. It was taken into battle. It was treated as something operational, not ornamental. The descriptions surrounding it suggest an object with defined interaction conditions governed by precise requirements. Leonard Woolley's excavations in the ancient city of Ur began in the 1920s. In 1926, he and his team were finally ready to open what they called the Gold Trench, an area where small fragments of gold had been surfacing from the ground almost since the first days of excavation. Years had passed before they reached this point, not out of hesitation, but out of the recognition that whatever lay beneath the earth required precision, preparation, and care. At the end of that season, working in a cemetery with about 2,500 graves, the excavators discovered a deep shaft. At its base lay a gold dagger with a hilt made of lapis lazuli and a sheath of gold, alongside copper weapons and finely crafted tools. Nothing of such quality and antiquity had ever been found before in Mesopotamian archaeology. The dagger stands out, not for its beauty, though that is remarkable, but a dagger stands out. It wasn't a weapon used in combat. The materials, the craftsmanship, the delicate construction, these aren't the characteristics of something made for survival. They belong to an object designed for a completely different purpose. An object associated with transition. On one side, the world of the living. On the other, everything the Sumerians believed existed beyond it. Woolley discovered 16 tombs that he identified as royal. Each contained a stone chamber at the base of a deep shaft, accessible by a descending ramp. The central body lay surrounded by gold, silver, and semi-precious stones. And then there were the others. Dozens of bodies in some shafts. Attendants, soldiers, servants, individuals who entered the shaft and never returned. Woolley called them death shafts, a name that remains because nothing more accurate has replaced it. The question isn't what was found there. The question is what the gold was doing there. The metal that does not change. The metal that remains untouched by time. The metal that can be buried for 4,000 years and recovered without alteration. Interestingly, in modern medicine, gold nanoparticles are being used as carriers. Through mechanisms such as the EPR effect, in which tumor tissues allow greater accumulation, these particles target specific sites. They move through the body without degrading and resist interaction with surrounding biological systems. They arrive intact and deliver their cargo precisely where it is needed. A vehicle that reaches its destination without being destroyed along the way. The parallel here is a conclusion that cannot be ignored. The Sumerians placed gold at the threshold between life and what lies beyond it. Modern medicine uses gold to move through the interior of the human body, reaching places that other materials cannot reach. In both cases, the same property is at play. Gold goes where other materials cannot go, and arrives unaltered. Those who regularly follow this channel already know that the Anunnaki are the gods revered by humanity's first civilization. In Sumeria, gold appears specifically, not as decoration, but as a condition. There is also another interpretation, more controversial, widely debated, but persistent. The claim that the beings described as Anunnaki came to Earth in search of gold, not for worship, not for symbolic value, for the material itself. The mainstream academic community rejects this interpretation, but the rejection does not eliminate the fundamental question: why gold? Why does this specific metal, chemically inert, structurally stable, irrelevant to survival, appear at the center of the divine system in the oldest known civilization? The Sumerians recognized something in this metal. What this recognition actually meant remains unanswered. In ancient Egypt, gold was the flesh of the gods, the substance of divine bodies. It was the material of incorruptibility in Egyptian cosmology. It was not a symbol, it was the thing itself. The sun god, Ra, was called the Mountain of Gold. During the Old Kingdom, the pharaoh held the title of Golden Horus. The skin of the gods was described as gold. This was not a metaphor superimposed on theology. It was a physical statement, a statement about composition. Silver was associated with bones, and gold was associated with flesh. It is interesting to note the inevitable parallel with the biblical Genesis and Exodus. In Egypt, gold and silver, which according to the Bible itself belong to the biblical God, were two materials attributed to two different functions within a divine body. It is structural. This reflects a system that treats the divine as something materially defined. For me, it's impossible not to recall the great goal of alchemy, to transform lead into gold. Research has begun to explore whether gold nanoparticles can influence the aging process. Telomeres function as markers of cellular aging. As cells divide, telomeres shorten, gradually limiting the cell's lifespan. A study published in the International Journal of Molecular Sciences examined human fibroblasts exposed to gold nanoparticles. The results showed increased telomerase activity, the enzyme responsible for maintaining telomere length, suggesting a possible slowdown in cellular aging. The evidence is preliminary, limited to specific conditions, a single cell type, and early-stage experiments. But the direction is clear. Gold, at the nanoscale, is interacting with the mechanism that governs the rate at which a cell ages. If the Egyptians described gold as the substance of immortal bodies, modern research is examining whether gold interacts with the biological process that defines mortality. The two claims are not the same, but they occupy the same conceptual space. In ancient Egypt, gold was precisely placed. During the Old Kingdom, the capstones of the pyramids, the pyramidions, were coated with gold or electrum. At the top of structures built with millions of tons of stone, the material chosen for the point where the earth meets the sky was gold. The point of contact, the place where the monument rises toward the heavens. This decision was not aesthetic. It was theological. The pyramidion marked the place where the sun god Ra was believed to dwell. The same logic appears in funerary practices. Tutankhamun's mask is often seen as a treasure, but within Egyptian theology, its purpose was specific. Gold was placed on the face of the deceased because it was believed to maintain the connection between the soul and the eternal. The mask was not symbolic. It was functional, a material intervention at a critical threshold. Gold reflects 99% of infrared light. Aluminum and silver reflect significantly less. Of all the materials available to ancient civilizations, the one chosen for sacred environments is, according to modern measurements, the most efficient reflector of electromagnetic radiation. They observed something. They didn't measure it. They didn't quantify it. But they recognized its effect and built a system of meanings around it. Modern research suggests that gold nanoparticles can also reduce oxidative stress by neutralizing reactive oxygen species. The Egyptian system described gold as protection against decomposition. The structure was theological. The mechanism being studied now is biochemical. The result described in both cases is the same. Resistance to the processes that degrade, consume, and extinguish biological life. Gold does not appear in survival contexts anywhere in the ancient world. This carries more weight than it first appears. Civilizations that possessed abundant gold, and Egypt did, with mines in the eastern desert and Nubia producing vast quantities, made the consistent and deliberate decision not to use it for practical purposes. Every civilization understood the difference between a material that functions and a material that has meaning. Gold has always been in the latter category. Gold appears in specific locations, in the burial pit and not in the house, in the inner sanctuary and not in the anteroom, in the cornerstone and not in the foundation. Gold is in the funerary mask, placed at the moment of death, the mercy seat on the ark, the consecrated statue in the deepest chamber of the temple. Everywhere the boundary is demarcated between the human world and what lies beyond it, gold is present. Not random or accidental. It is consistent. Gold belongs to the boundary where the common world ends and the divine world begins. Incorruptible, eternal, divine flesh. These descriptions arise independently in different civilizations. After all, why does the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn have this name? Why do several children's films show a pot of gold at the bottom of the rainbow? As many already know, there is an appreciation for the rock genre, spanning from the most classic to the heaviest metal. From Elvis, the Beatles, and the Rolling Stones, to Arch Enemy and Behemoth. Ozzy Osbourne, the legendary Prince of Darkness, sang in the legendary song Mr. Crowley, "I hear maidens call, approaching a time that is drastic." This can be seen as an unequivocal analogy of the return to the Gnostic divine source, Sophia, and the drastic moment of transforming into the most radiant metal that exists. Aleister Crowley once said that gold, money, and jewels have no intrinsic value. He believed it was necessary to sacrifice wealth for the sake of higher goals. But perhaps Crowley could change his mind upon observing the properties of gold that are being discovered today. The unique behavior of gold can be explained, in part, by the theory of relativity. The nucleus of a gold atom has a strong positive charge, causing its electrons to move at speeds close to the speed of light. At these speeds, relativistic effects become significant. The electrons increase their effective mass, altering their behavior. This stabilization reduces their availability for chemical bonds, which contributes to gold's resistance to oxidation and corrosion. Gold does not deteriorate due to relativistic physics. Its atomic structure operates on the frontier where classical mechanics does not fully apply. The ancient world had no knowledge of this. No equations, no models. What existed was observation. Gold did not change. There is another dimension to this. Gold does not form in ordinary stellar processes. It originates from neutron star collisions, extreme energy events where heavy elements are created through rapid nucleosynthesis. Two collapsed stars collide. Matter is compressed, transformed, and expelled. The gold found on Earth was forged in such an event, billions of years ago. The metal itself originates from a process so violent, so energetic, that for a brief period, it eclipses entire galaxies. Several factors can explain why gold has attracted so much attention. Its resistance to decay, its visual similarity to sunlight, its rarity. But they don't fully explain why this value has invariably become divine. Why not simply precious? Why not merely beautiful? Why, in all civilizations, has gold always been placed on the same level as the gods? For most of the 20th century, gold was considered one of the least interesting metals in a chemistry lab. Not the least valuable, but the least interesting. Platinum catalyzed reactions, and palladium enabled organic synthesis. Silver had applications in photography, medicine, and industry. Gold remained stable, reliable, and non-reactive. It was useful in electronics for its conductivity, and in dentistry for its biocompatibility. But as a catalyst, as a material capable of driving chemical reactions, it was considered essentially useless. This conclusion was not theoretical. It was supported by decades of experimental evidence. And the conclusion was that gold did not react. Then, in 1987, something unexpected happened. A research group led by Masatake Haruta combined chloroauric acid, iron nitrate, and sodium carbonate. The result was unexpected. Gold nanoparticles, measuring between 3 and 5 nanometers, exhibited catalytic activity. Not under extreme conditions, but at temperatures as low as -70 degrees Celsius. At temperatures where most chemical reactions slow down or stop completely, the gold began to function. The metal that did nothing suddenly started doing something. On a scale invisible to the human eye, its behavior changed completely. At the nanoscale, gold loses its nobility. Bulk gold, the kind held in the hand, behaves one way. Nanoscale gold behaves differently. Not as a variation of the same material, but as something with distinct properties. At this scale, gold becomes reactive. The underlying mechanism involves surface plasmonic resonance, the collective oscillation of electrons on the nanoparticle surface in response to light. Gold, on a human scale, appears yellow, associated with heat, light, and the sun. At the nanoscale, the same element can appear red. The same atoms, arranged differently, produce a completely different interaction with light. This is a technical detail of recent discovery. It is fascinating, and it would have helped ancient alchemists and esotericists like Aleister Crowley understand a little more about the nature of the gods. In terms of quantum mechanics, when gold is reduced below a certain threshold, quantum confinement becomes dominant. The rules change, and the material enters a different physical regime. Two versions of the same element emerge. One, stable and inert. The other, reactive and dynamic. The distinction depends entirely on the scale. When Haruta's findings were published, they were met with skepticism. The assumption was not entirely wrong. It was incomplete. The experiments had been conducted at the wrong scale. Once the scale changed, the behavior changed. From that point, a new field developed. Gold catalysis expanded into pollution control, hydrogen production, and cancer treatment. The metal, once considered inactive, revealed a completely different capability. This observation connects directly to the broader pattern. The ancient world encountered gold on the only scale accessible to human perception. At this level, the conclusion was clear. Gold does not decompose. What could not be observed was the scale at which gold behaves differently, the level at which it becomes active, responsive, and capable of interacting with biological systems. These phenomena exist below the threshold of human perception. What the ancient world observed, it codified in the only available system capable of preserving this knowledge: theology. If gold was described as divine and as the substance of immortal bodies, then the observation was correct. On the human scale, gold does not transform. But on the scale that the eyes cannot see, everything is different. This is so revolutionary that it could lead to testing its application in other areas. On one side, a cancerous cell is placed. On the other, a gold nanoparticle. Then, the distance between them decreases. When gold nanoparticles accumulate inside cancerous cells and are exposed to near-infrared light, the absorbed energy is converted into heat. This creates localized hyperthermia, a precise increase in temperature that destroys the malignant cells, leaving the surrounding healthy tissue intact. This sounds like science fiction, but these are modern and very recent studies. As a librarian, reliable sources of information, such as PubMed, were consulted. The mechanism described is exact, The gold finds the cell. The light finds the gold. And then the gold converts the light into heat. This is surface plasmonic resonance in action. In this case, not in a laboratory, but inside a living body and inside a tumor. A substance introduced into the body, interacting with light beyond the visible spectrum, eliminating what shouldn't be there and preserving everything else. Operating below the threshold of human perception, producing an effect that, from the outside, seems almost invisible. Gold is now being used to guide the body toward healing through processes that cannot be seen, only measured. Furthermore, gold is already present in several medical applications. Reconstructive surgery of the middle ear, implants in the upper eyelid, advanced drug delivery systems, therapy for rheumatoid arthritis, and endovascular stents. In each case, gold is not chosen for its appearance. It is chosen for its behavior. It interacts with the biological process that defines mortality. Modern research suggests that gold nanoparticles may also reduce oxidative stress by neutralizing reactive oxygen species, molecules that damage cells and accelerate aging. This process affects telomerase function and cellular longevity. At the nanoscale, gold appears to interfere with the mechanisms that degrade biological systems. The ancient Egyptian system described gold as protection against deterioration, preservation of the body, continuity of the soul, and resistance to dissolution. Back then, the structure was theological. Today, the mechanism being studied is biochemical. The result described in both cases is the same: resistance to the processes that degrade, consume, and extinguish biological life. This does not establish a definitive connection, but it establishes a pattern that resists rejection. In Egyptian cosmology, Ra traveled across the sky every day in his solar ship, the Manjet, and descended to the underworld at night, navigating the darkness before emerging again at dawn. This cycle of death and rebirth defined the structure of existence. Gold was the substance of Ra's body, but it was also the material of the ship. Just as gold was placed on the faces of the dead as they experienced the same transition, from life to whatever lies beyond it. This was not symbolic decoration. It was a system of meaning built around an observed relationship between gold, light, and continuity. At some level, the connection had been recognized, and today, astronomy recognizes it as well. The lunar surface has no atmosphere. Temperatures near the moon's equator can exceed 121 degrees Celsius, 250 degrees Fahrenheit, during the day, and drop to minus 133 degrees Celsius, minus 208 degrees Fahrenheit, at night. Without air to disperse or filter the radiation, all wavelengths of the sun arrive unimpeded. Visible light, infrared, ultraviolet, X-rays. All of this hits the surface directly. The engineers who designed the Apollo suits understood this. They needed a material that could interpose itself between the human eye and the unfiltered solar radiation. Something capable of reflecting harmful radiation while allowing visibility. The solution was gold. The Apollo 11 visor included a thin layer of gold, approximately 0.000002 inches thick. A layer only a few hundred atoms deep, thin enough to be transparent, resistant enough to reflect infrared radiation and protect the astronaut. An invisible barrier. A gold film placed between human perception and a star. Thousands of years later, when humans first left Earth's atmosphere, surpassing the protection of air, the same material reappeared. Gold was placed between the human eye and the sun. The James Webb Space Telescope, designed to capture the primordial light of the universe, uses mirrors coated with gold, approximately 100 nanometers thick. Gold reflects 99% of infrared light, surpassing all other materials. Again, gold appears at a boundary between human observation and the origins of the universe, between the observer and the light source. The Egyptian system expressed this in theological terms: a golden being crossing the sky, a golden vessel moving through light and darkness. Modern engineering expresses the same principle through physics. Gold is used where interaction with radiation needs to be precise, stable, and uninterrupted. There is an image from the Apollo 11 mission. Buzz Aldrin is on the surface of the moon. His visor, coated in gold, reflects the scene before him. Neil Armstrong, the lunar module, the gray landscape, and the black sky beyond. The first humans to set foot on another world saw themselves through a layer of gold. The material is between them and the sun, between them and space, between them and the conditions that would bring an end to their existence. The same material placed thousands of years before on the border between life and what exists beyond it. Gold stands out in the periodic table as the ultimate example of chemical nobility. Its resistance to oxidation, combined with electronic properties shaped by relativistic effects, places it in a unique position in the structure of matter. Its electron affinity, 222.8 kilojoules per mole, is the highest among all metals. Of the 118 known elements, gold is one of the least reactive, surpassed only by platinum in chemical stability. This is not a casual distinction. It is the description of an element that behaves differently from almost everything else that exists. The ancient world had no periodic table, no reactivity series, and no measurements of electron affinity. What existed was long-term observation. And from this observation, in Egypt, Mesopotamia, and in the biblical tradition, the same conclusion emerged independently. Gold is the matter of the eternal. Gold belongs to the boundary between the living and what lies beyond. The convergence between this conclusion and what modern physics reveals proves nothing beyond itself, but it requires explanation. For 3,000 years, in civilizations without direct contact, the same metal, the second most chemically stable known, was consistently associated with the divine. There are explanations. The human attraction to the color of the sun, the visual similarity to sunlight, the experience of finding unaltered gold in nature. These are valid factors, but they don't completely explain the accuracy of the pattern. In comparative studies of ancient religions, there is a term for this: non-contact convergence. Independent systems arriving at the same conclusion under different conditions. The underlying question of this convergence is simple. What material does not yield to time? Gold became the answer. Ancient systems described gold as the substance of immortal bodies, not as decoration, but as a component. Each example cited here, if considered in isolation, can be explained. But together, they form a pattern. It's not proof, but it is evidence. Something about this metal led ancient systems to place it at the center of their understanding of the divine. And something about this same metal leads modern science, without reference to those systems, to trust it where precision is crucial and error is unacceptable. This is why the biblical statement in Haggai, chapter 2, verse 8, is so intriguing. For these studies, the original Hebrew version in direct translation is used. And here, everything is different. It reads, "Mine is the silver, and mine is the gold. Avering is Yahweh of hosts." A statement uttered after the collapse, the temple destroyed, a people returning from exile. At that moment, the statement is not presented as consolation. It is a claim, not to establish ownership, but to remind a downtrodden people that the materials necessary to rebuild what was lost already belong to the one who calls them to rebuild it. The specificity of the gold and the silver remains. It does not claim the mountains or the rivers or the harvests, named separately, defined precisely. In one of the shortest verses in the text, the choice is deliberate. In the coming decades, nanomaterials are expected to play a central role in controlling biological processes. And in this new scenario, gold is not peripheral. It emerges as an interface, a point of contact between biological systems and engineered systems, between what is alive and what is constructed, between the current state of the human body and what it could become. The boundary between biology and technology, once absolute, is becoming permeable. And at this boundary, gold reappears. A gold nanoparticle enters a cell. It interacts with biological processes. It alters function. At that moment, the distinction between what is natural and what is engineered becomes less clear. Ancient systems described beings beyond the human condition, entities composed of gold, resistant to decay, capable of existing in environments that would destroy common biological structures. Modern science, starting from entirely different premises, is now approaching a similar territory. Mythology, theology, and belief have become the new engineering. Post-humanism and transhumanism are emerging. A threshold is being approached between natural processes and engineering intervention. The question that emerges is clear. Will eternal life, physical or metaphysical, be achieved this time? Something once guarded by the gods? Or, once again, as in the oldest known myth of human history, will the journey end with a return home without the most divine of rewards? The lead that becomes gold. I hear maidens call, approaching a time that is drastic. Standing with their backs to the wall, was it polemically sent? The meaning behind this may point to a moment of transition, a call toward transformation, toward something irreversible. A threshold where the known structure no longer holds, and something new begins to emerge.